She has nowhere else to go. That was what my son-in-law said about me at 11:47 on a Thursday night, standing in my own living room, beneath the wedding photograph my late husband had hung there with his own hands. He did not whisper it because he was ashamed. He whispered it because he thought I was already asleep. My daughter, Emily, did not correct him. That was the part that stayed with me. Not his voice. Not the way he said it like I was an old coat they had not yet figured out where to store. Her silence. I stood in the hallway with one hand on the wall, feeling the cold Vermont air slip through the old window frame beside me, and I waited for my daughter to say, "Bradley, don't talk about my mother like that." She didn't. Instead, she said, "After tomorrow, everything will be easier." Everything. That word did something strange to me. It did not make me cry. It made me very still. I had spent 71 years learning how to survive hard things quietly. A husband buried too early. A mortgage paid one late check at a time. Winters so cold the pipes groaned like they were begging for mercy. A daughter I loved more than breath growing into a woman who could look at the house that raised her and see only square footage, resale value, and inconvenience. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed Richard and I had shared for 38 years. The room was half empty now because Emily had started moving my things just to make it safer. My dresser had been pushed against the wall. My good quilts were boxed in the laundry room. The brass key Richard gave me the day we bought this place still sat in the little blue dish on my nightstand. I picked it up and held it in my palm until the teeth pressed into my skin. Richard used to say a house was not yours because your name was on a bill. It was yours because you protected what happened inside it. At 3:36 that morning, I stopped being the woman they thought had nowhere else to go. I put on Richard's old wool coat, the green one that still smelled faintly of cedar, and called Ruth Bennett next door. She answered on the second ring, because women our age know that a phone call before dawn is never casual. "Margaret," she said, "are you all right?" I looked toward the closed guest room door where my daughter and her husband were sleeping under my roof, dreaming about taking it from me. "I need a ride," I said. By 4:58, a locksmith was standing on my front porch, his breath white in the dark, his toolbox open beside his boots. Snow dusted the steps. Ruth stood by the driveway in her bathrobe under a winter coat, holding coffee in both hands, watching without asking a single question. The first old lock came out with a soft metal click. I remember that sound better than I remember my own heartbeat. By sunrise, my daughter would be screaming on the other side of that same door. And for the first time in 44 years, I would not open it. That house had never been just a house to me. It sat on 3 quiet acres outside Waterbury, Vermont, tucked between a line of maple trees and a narrow road that disappeared under snow every December. Richard and I bought it in 1986, back when the kitchen cabinets were crooked, the roof leaked over the back hallway, and the furnace made a sound like an old truck trying to start. We could not afford anything better. We could barely afford that. Richard was working maintenance at the ski resort then, and I was picking up double shifts at the county clinic, taking blood pressure readings, answering phones, cleaning exam rooms when the janitor called in sick. Every Friday, we sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, 2 cups of cheap coffee, and a stack of bills that always seemed taller than hope. But Richard would tap the mortgage envelope with one finger and say, "One day, Maggie, this place will be ours free and clear." I used to laugh at him because the walls were thin, the porch sagged, and the upstairs bathroom smelled like old pipes whenever it rained. But he saw something I could not see yet. He saw apple trees in the back. He saw Emily running barefoot across the yard. He saw Thanksgiving dinners, snow boots by the door, scraped knees, report cards on the refrigerator, and grandchildren who might someday ask why the third stair squeaked. He was right about all of it except the grandchildren. Emily was 7 when Richard painted little pencil marks on the pantry doorframe to track her height. She would stand straight as a soldier, chin lifted, waiting for him to draw the line. 1st grade, 2nd grade, 4th grade after she broke her wrist falling off Ruth Bennett's stone wall. 14 years old, when she stopped wanting us to measure her, but secretly checked the marks when she thought we were not looking. Those lines are still there. I never painted over them. I could not. The kitchen still has the small burn mark from the year Emily tried to make pancakes for Mother's Day and left the pan too long on the stove. The front closet still smells faintly of pine and wet wool from all the winters Richard came home covered in snow. The living room window still catches the morning light exactly the way it did the day he carried Emily inside from the hospital, wrapped in a yellow blanket, with tears standing in his eyes because he was too proud to let them fall. After he died, people told me I should sell. Too much house, they said. Too much land. Too much upkeep for one woman. Maybe they were right in practical terms. The gutters needed cleaning. The driveway had to be plowed. The property taxes climbed every year like they were trying to chase me out. But practical people do not understand what it means to sleep under a roof built by the hands of someone who loved you. They do not understand that every loose floorboard can hold a memory. They do not understand that leaving a house can feel like leaving the last person who ever truly protected you. So I stayed. I learned which contractor was honest. I learned how to reset the breaker when the power flickered. I learned which windows needed plastic before the first frost and how much salt to spread on the porch steps after freezing rain. I was not helpless. I was lonely. There is a difference. Emily used to know that. At least I believe she did. She grew up in that house. She slammed its doors when she was angry, cried on its stairs after her first heartbreak, left for college from that driveway with 3 suitcases and Richard pretending not to wipe his eyes. For years after she moved away, she still called it home. Then Richard died, and somewhere between the funeral casseroles and the paperwork, the word changed. She stopped saying home. She started saying property. Emily came back into my life the way careful people enter a room where something valuable might be broken. Slowly, softly, with both hands visible. For the first month after Richard's funeral, she called every evening at 7. She asked whether I had eaten, whether I had slept, whether I had remembered to take the blood pressure pills my doctor prescribed after the service. She drove up from Burlington on Saturdays with containers of chicken soup, folded laundry without being asked, and sat beside me on the porch while the maple trees turned red and gold around us. I wanted to believe it was love. Maybe some part of it was. That is what makes betrayal so hard to recognize at first. It does not always walk in wearing cruelty. Sometimes it brings groceries. Sometimes it speaks gently. Sometimes it calls you mom in the same voice that once asked you to check for monsters under the bed. Bradley came with her most weekends. He was polite in that polished way men can be when they want an older woman to feel grateful instead of suspicious. He fixed the loose railing by the back steps. He shoveled the walkway after an early snow. He carried heavy boxes from the basement and told me I should not be lifting things at my age. At first, I thanked him. I even felt guilty for not liking the way his eyes moved through my house. He did not look at the pantry door where Emily's height marks still ran up the frame. He did not notice Richard's old fishing hat on the hook by the mudroom. He looked at outlets, ceilings, floorboards, the view from the living room window, the distance from the house to the road. One Sunday afternoon, I found him standing in the backyard with his phone raised, slowly turning in a circle. "Just taking a video for Emily," he said when he saw me. "This place has a lot of potential." Potential? That was the first word that made my stomach tighten. Emily began using different words after that. Manageable, practical, safer, smaller. She would say them while rinsing dishes or sorting my mail, never looking directly at me when she did. "Mom, this house is a lot for one person. Mom, the driveway is almost 200 feet. What happens if you slip before the plow comes? Mom, heating oil is not getting cheaper." Each sentence sounded like concern. Each one left a little bruise. I told myself she was worried because she loved me. I told myself grief had made me too sensitive. Then the suggestions started arriving with numbers attached. Bradley printed out estimates for a new roof, a furnace replacement, septic maintenance, property taxes over the next 10 years. He laid them across my kitchen table like evidence in a trial I had not known I was attending. Emily sat beside me and took my hand. "We just want you protected," she said. "You worked too hard to lose everything because of one bad winter." I remember looking at her fingers wrapped around mine. Same small scar near her thumb from when she cut herself carving a pumpkin at 11 years old. I had driven her to urgent care that night through freezing rain, telling her jokes the whole way so she would not be scared. Now that same hand was holding mine while she explained that I might not be capable of staying in the only home I had left. The change did not happen all at once. That was the clever part. First, Emily offered to help organize my bills. Then she asked for online access so she could keep an eye on due dates. Then Bradley suggested meeting with someone about estate planning because, as he put it, families get messy when paperwork is not clear. I should have stopped him there. I should have heard Richard's voice in my head, low and steady, telling me not to let anyone rush me at my own kitchen table. But loneliness can make good judgment feel rude. So I smiled. I nodded. I let them talk. And while they talked about safety, stability, and family, Bradley kept glancing toward the hallway, measuring my home like a man waiting for the current owner to step aside. The folder appeared on my kitchen table the following Friday, placed exactly where Richard and I used to stack our bills. It was dark blue, thick, and held shut with a silver clip. Emily set it down gently, almost respectfully, as if paper could become less dangerous when handled with care. Bradley stood behind her with his hands in his pockets, wearing the calm expression of a man who had already decided how the conversation should end. Outside, snow moved past the windows in slow white sheets, softening the road. The trees, the porch steps, everything except the feeling in that room. "Mom," Emily said, "we talked to someone who specializes in family protection planning." I looked at the folder, then at her. Protection from what? She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. From confusion. From probate. From emergencies. From people taking advantage of you. Bradley pulled out a chair without asking and sat down across from me. "This is actually very common, Margaret. At your age, the smart thing is to have everything organized before there is a crisis." At your age. He said it like a fact from a weather report. Not cruel, not loud, just cold enough to settle under my skin. Emily opened the folder and turned several pages toward me. There were highlighted sections, sticky notes, signature lines marked with tiny red arrows. Trust agreement. Durable power of attorney. Property management authorization. Preliminary deed transfer. Words I understood separately, but together they formed a wall I could not see over. "This does not mean you are losing anything," Emily said quickly, as if she had practiced that part. "It just lets us help if something happens." "Nothing has happened," I said. Bradley leaned forward. "Not yet. That is the point." I remember the old clock above the stove ticking too loudly. I remember the smell of coffee I had forgotten to drink. I remember looking at my daughter and trying to find the little girl who once cried because she thought moving a robin's nest would make the mother bird sad. "Would I still own the house?" I asked. Emily touched my wrist. "Of course, Mom. This is still your home." Bradley nodded. "Functionally, yes. It just gives Emily authority to manage things efficiently. Bills, repairs, possible transitions later, that kind of thing." "Transitions?" I repeated. Emily's hand tightened slightly. "Only if you ever wanted something easier. A condo, senior living, maybe something closer to us." There it was, placed gently in the middle of the table, like a folded napkin. The future they had already imagined for me. Smaller, quieter, away. I should have closed the folder. I should have told them I needed my own lawyer in the room. But Emily looked tired, and I was still learning how to wake up in that house without Richard breathing beside me. Grief makes silence feel like cooperation. It makes pressure feel like help. Bradley slid a pen toward me. "No rush," he said, though his phone kept lighting up beside his elbow. Emily said, "The notary is only available until 6, and Bradley already rearranged his meetings for this." No rules. But everything had to be done that evening. I signed 3 pages before my hand began to shake. Emily noticed and kissed the top of my head. "You are doing the right thing," she whispered. That was when Richard's voice came back to me, not as a memory, but almost as a warning. "Never sign anything you do not keep a copy of, Maggie." So when Emily went to make tea and Bradley stepped outside to take a call, I quietly pulled the stack closer and slid the carbon copies into the lower drawer beside the oven mitts. My heart was beating hard, but my face stayed calm. When they returned, I signed the last page. Emily hugged me longer than usual. Bradley gathered the folder too quickly. That night, after they left, I opened the drawer and stared at the copies under the yellow kitchen light. I did not know yet exactly what I had signed. But I knew one thing. People who are only trying to protect you do not look relieved when they think you forgot to protect yourself. The change in Emily did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like furniture being moved 1 inch at a time, until one morning I looked around and no longer recognized the room I was standing in. 2 weeks after I signed the papers, she came over with cardboard boxes from the liquor store and a roll of masking tape. "Just getting you organized, Mom," she said, writing winter clothes on one box, even though half the sweaters she packed were the ones I wore every week. Bradley followed her in with a measuring tape clipped to his belt. He said he wanted to check the hallway width in case I ever needed mobility equipment. That sounded thoughtful until I found him measuring the wall between the kitchen and dining room, then taking photographs of the cabinets Richard had sanded and stained himself. "Open concept would make this place breathe," he said, not to me, but to Emily. I stood by the sink with a dish towel in my hands and felt something inside me go very quiet. The next Saturday, Emily arrived before breakfast and told me she had been thinking about the stairs. "The primary bedroom does not make sense for you anymore," she said. "It is too far from the bathroom, and if you got dizzy at night, nobody would hear you." Nobody. As if I had spent years collapsing silently in corners instead of living alone, paying bills, clearing snow from the porch, and remembering to lock every door before dark. She led me to the little room behind the laundry area, the one Richard used to call the sewing room, even though I never sewed anything there except a loose button. It had one narrow window facing the side yard and a baseboard heater that clicked through the night. "This will be cozier," Emily said. Bradley stood in the doorway and nodded. "Much safer." They moved my clothes that afternoon. Not all of them. Just enough to make it look temporary while feeling permanent. My good dresser stayed upstairs because Bradley said it was too heavy. My framed wedding photograph came down from the primary bedroom wall and leaned against a box in the hallway. Emily said she would rehang it later. She never did. Richard's blue flannel shirt, the one I kept on the chair beside the bed because some foolish part of me still liked seeing it there, disappeared into a storage bin labeled miscellaneous. That word hurt more than I expected. By dinner, the room where I had slept beside my husband for nearly 4 decades smelled like cardboard and furniture polish. Emily opened the windows to freshen it up. Bradley stood in the middle of it and said, "This could be a beautiful guest suite once we update the lighting."
Guest suite.
I was still in the house, but somehow I had become the guest. After that, the language changed faster. My kitchen became the main level. My porch became curb appeal. The pantry door with Emily's height marks became something we can replace. When I said no, Emily sighed as if I had embarrassed her. "Mom, you cannot keep every old thing forever." I looked at those pencil lines and saw a 7-year-old girl standing on tiptoe. Emily saw damaged trim. The night before I called the locksmith, they stayed over because Bradley said the weather was getting bad and he did not want Emily driving back to Burlington after dark. I made soup. Emily barely touched hers. Bradley spent most of the meal answering messages under the table. Around 10, I went to my small room behind the laundry area and closed the door, but I did not sleep. The house carries sound in winter. Heat knocks in the pipes. Floorboards answer footsteps. Voices travel through old walls whether people remember that or not. Near midnight, I heard them in the living room. Bradley said the contractor could start in 2 weeks if the paperwork cleared. Emily said she did not want a scene. Then Bradley gave a low laugh and said, "What scene? She has nowhere else to go." I waited for my daughter to defend me. I waited for the girl I had raised in that house to remember, whose hands packed her lunches, whose paycheck bought her winter boots, whose arms held her through every ordinary heartbreak she had long since forgotten. Emily only said, "After tomorrow, everything will be easier." I sat on the edge of that narrow bed until my feet went cold against the floor. I did not pray. I did not cry. I opened the lower drawer of the nightstand, took out the copies I had hidden from the blue folder, and placed Richard's brass key on top of them. For the first time since he died, the house did not feel empty. It felt like it was waiting for me to remember who I was. I called Thomas Reed at 7:12 the next morning from Ruth Bennett's kitchen because I did not trust myself to make that call from my own house. Ruth sat across from me in her robe, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching my face the way women watch each other when they already know the answer is bad. Thomas had handled Richard's estate after the heart attack. He was a careful man with silver hair, quiet shoes, and a way of reading documents that made people stop talking before they embarrassed themselves. When his assistant answered, I said my name, and my voice sounded older than I expected. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, softening immediately. "Is everything all right?" I looked down at the blue folder copies spread across Ruth's table. The red signature arrows looked smaller in daylight. Meaner, somehow. "No," I said. "I need to see Thomas today." She put me on hold for less than a minute. When Thomas came on the line, he did not ask unnecessary questions. That was one thing I had always respected about him. "Margaret," he said, "bring everything you signed. Do not tell Emily. Do not sign anything else." His voice was calm, but there was a hard edge beneath it. I heard it. So did Ruth. By 9:30, I was sitting in Thomas Reed's office in Montpelier, wearing Richard's green wool coat over the sweater Emily had tried to pack away. The office smelled like paper, lemon furniture polish, and old radiator heat. Thomas spread the copies across his desk, put on his reading glasses, and began turning pages. I watched his face. Lawyers try not to show much. Nurses do the same thing when they are reading a chart before speaking to the family. But after 10 minutes, Thomas took off his glasses and set them down very slowly. "Margaret," he said, "did anyone advise you to have independent counsel before signing this?" Bradley said it was standard. Thomas looked at me over the desk. "That is not what I asked." My mouth went dry. "No," he nodded once, and went back to the papers. Trust agreement. Durable power of attorney. Property management authorization. Deed transfer draft. He explained each one in plain English, which somehow made them sound worse. The documents did not take my house that day, not completely. That was the first breath I could take. The deed transfer had been prepared, but it had not been properly recorded with the Washington County clerk. The trust language was sloppy. The authority Emily claimed was broad, but not absolute. The power of attorney had warning signs all over it because I had signed it in my kitchen, under pressure, with Bradley managing the process and no lawyer representing only me. "You are still the legal owner," Thomas said. I closed my eyes. For 1 second, I felt Richard standing behind me. Then Thomas opened his laptop. "There is more." He had me authorize him to check county records and related filings. Then he asked whether Bradley had used email to discuss contractors or future plans. I said I did not know. Thomas made 2 calls. The second one lasted longer. He only said, "Send it to me," and waited. When the email arrived, he turned the screen toward me. It was from Bradley to a local remodeling company, asking about starting demolition work on the interior walls within 2 weeks, pending final control of the property. Another message referenced a realtor in Stowe and used the words elder occupant transitions out. I stared at that phrase until the letters stopped looking real. Elder occupant. Not mother. Not widow. Not Margaret. Occupant. Thomas closed the laptop gently. "They were not preparing to care for you," he said. "They were preparing to remove you." I did not cry. Not then. Something colder than grief had taken its place. I asked him what I could do before they finished whatever they had started. Thomas folded his hands on the desk. "First, we revoke the power of attorney. Second, we notify the county clerk not to accept any transfer without direct confirmation from you and my office. Third, we document possible undue influence. Fourth, you secure your home." He said secure, not fight. Secure, not beg. I looked at the brass key in my palm, the one I had carried in my coat pocket all morning. "Can I change the locks?" Thomas leaned back slightly. For the first time since I walked in, he almost smiled. "Margaret," he said, "it is your house." Thomas Reed did not tell me to hurry. He told me to be precise. That made all the difference. He prepared the revocation documents before noon, and I signed them in his office with my own pen, under my own name, with no one standing over my shoulder. He sent notice to the county clerk, copied a title attorney, and gave me a sealed envelope to keep by the front door in case anyone questioned my right to be there. "Do not argue," he said as he walked me to the elevator. "Do not explain more than necessary. Paperwork first, emotion later." I carried those words home like a second key. Ruth drove because my hands were steady, but my thoughts were not. The sky had turned the flat gray color that comes before more snow, and the bare maple branches along Route 100 looked like they were holding their breath. When we pulled into my driveway, Emily's car was gone, and Bradley's truck was gone with it. They had left a note on the kitchen counter saying they were driving into Burlington for errands and would be back after dinner. "Love you, Mom," Emily had written at the bottom. The words looked different now. Not false exactly, just smaller than what she had done. I did not touch anything at first. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, as if greeting someone I had almost abandoned. In the kitchen, I ran my hand over the burn mark beside the stove. In the hallway, I touched the pantry doorframe where Emily's height marks climbed upward year by year. Upstairs, I stood in the primary bedroom and looked at the empty wall where my wedding photograph used to hang. Then I went to the laundry room, opened the storage bin marked miscellaneous, and took out Richard's blue flannel shirt. I folded it once, carefully, and placed it back on the chair beside our bed. Not their guest suite. Our room. My room. At 3:40 the next morning, I called Ruth again. She answered with one sentence. "I am already dressed." By 4:15, we were at a 24-hour locksmith outside bar, a small place with a red neon sign buzzing in the window and a coffee machine that sounded like it was losing an argument. The man behind the counter looked half asleep until I handed him my deed, my driver's license, and Thomas Reed's letter. Then he straightened. "You want every exterior lock changed?" he asked. "Every one," I said. "Front door, back door, basement door, garage entry, mailbox, and the keypad code." Ruth stood beside me with her arms folded. "And make the keys the kind people cannot copy at a hardware store," she added. I almost smiled. We reached the house while the world was still dark. The locksmith's van rolled up quietly, its headlights sweeping across the snowbanks. I stood on the porch in Richard's wool coat while he opened his toolbox and knelt by the front door. The first screws came out one by one. Small sounds. Clean sounds.
No shouting. No accusations.
Just metal turning. Old brass loosening. Cold air on my face. Ruth waited at the bottom of the steps with 2 paper cups of coffee. She did not tell me I was brave. I was grateful for that. Brave is a word people use after the hard part is finished. I was not brave yet. I was a 71-year-old woman standing outside her own house before sunrise, trying not to tremble while a stranger removed the lock my husband had installed 29 years earlier. When the old brass knob came free, I held it for a moment. It was scratched near the edge from Richard's wedding ring. I remembered him coming home late, stamping snow off his boots, turning that same knob with a tired smile because he knew I had kept dinner warm. My throat tightened, but I did not stop. "Put in the new one," I said. By 5:26, the front door had a new deadbolt. By 5:44, the back door was done. By 6:03, the garage keypad had been reset. I changed the alarm code myself, choosing the date Richard, and I paid off the mortgage. Then I placed Thomas Reed's envelope on the kitchen table, set Richard's brass key on top of it, and looked toward the guest room where Emily and Bradley were still away, still believing the house was waiting for them. They were wrong. For the first time in months, the house was waiting for me. Emily came back at 7:18 that morning with a cardboard tray of coffee and the confident face of a daughter who thought she still knew every door in her mother's house. Bradley followed her up the porch steps carrying a rolled set of contractor drawings under one arm. Behind them, a white pickup truck pulled into the driveway with North Ridge Renovations printed on the side. I watched from the living room window with Thomas Reed's envelope on the table behind me and Richard's brass key resting beside my hand. Emily reached for the front door first. Her old key went in halfway, then stopped. She frowned, pulled it out, tried again, and turned her wrist harder. Nothing moved. Bradley stepped closer. "Let me do it," he said, already annoyed. He took the key from her, pushed it into the lock, and twisted. The new deadbolt held. I could see the moment his face changed. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that comes when a plan meets something it did not account for. Emily knocked lightly at first. "Mom? Are you awake?" I stood still. She knocked again, sharper this time. "Mom, open the door." Bradley looked toward the contractor, then lowered his voice, though not enough. "This is exactly what I was talking about." Emily took out her phone and called me. I let it ring on the table until it stopped. Then she called again. I answered on the third ring. "Mom, why did you change the locks?" Her voice was thin and bright, the way it always sounded when she was trying not to look embarrassed in public. "Because I own the house," I said. Silence. Then Bradley's voice came through the phone, closer than hers. "Margaret, this is not appropriate. Open the door, so we can discuss this like adults." I looked at the pantry door frame with Emily's pencil marks still climbing toward the ceiling. "We discussed enough in my kitchen," I said. "Now, we will use paperwork." Emily exhaled my name like I had disappointed her. "Mom, please do not make this dramatic." That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because for months they had moved my clothes, measured my walls, planned my future, and called it care. The first time I set a boundary, it became drama. Bradley stepped off the porch and made a call. I could hear pieces of it through the window. Elderly.
Confused.
Refusing entry. Concerned for her safety. Those words were chosen carefully, and I knew then that Thomas had been right. Emotion later. Paperwork first. I hung up the phone and waited. Ruth Bennett appeared at the edge of her driveway in a navy coat and snow boots, pretending to check her mailbox, though everyone knew she had already collected it. The contractor stood beside his truck, shifting from one foot to the other, suddenly interested in the snow on his tires. 20 minutes later, a Washington County Sheriff's deputy pulled in. His name tag read Harris. He was young enough to be my grandson, but he removed his hat before speaking to me through the glass. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible family dispute and concerns about your welfare." "I understand," I said. "My attorney is on his way. The documents are on the table." Bradley stepped forward quickly. "Officer, she has been under a lot of stress. We have legal authority to manage the property." Deputy Harris looked at him. "Do you have proof of that authority?" Bradley glanced at Emily. Emily looked at the door instead of him. That was when Thomas Reed's black sedan turned into the driveway, slow and steady, like a period at the end of a sentence. He stepped out in his overcoat, with a leather briefcase in one hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. He simply walked up the porch steps, stood beside the deputy, and handed him the first document. "Mrs. Whitaker is the sole legal owner of this residence," he said. "Any prior authorization has been revoked. The county clerk has been notified. No transfer is valid without direct confirmation from my office." Bradley's jaw tightened. "This is a misunderstanding." Thomas opened his briefcase. "No, Mr. Parker. A misunderstanding is when someone forgets an appointment. Preparing demolition work on property you do not own is something else." The contractor looked up fast. Emily's face went pale. Then Ruth stepped forward from the driveway and held up her phone. "I also have what they said last night," she said, clear as a church bell. For the first time that morning, my daughter stopped looking angry. She looked exposed. Deputy Harris read the documents twice. He asked Thomas a few quiet questions, then looked at Bradley and Emily with a careful expression of a man who had seen enough family trouble to know when politeness was being used as wallpaper over something ugly. "At this time," he said, "Mrs. Whitaker appears to have legal possession and ownership of the residence. If you have belongings inside, arrangements can be made through counsel. You cannot enter without her permission." Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since he had walked into my house with that blue folder, he had no sentence ready. Emily stood on the porch holding the cardboard tray of coffee, her fingers turning red in the cold. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke on the word just enough to remind me of every fever, every school play, every night She had crawled into my bed after a nightmare. We were trying to help. I looked at my daughter through the narrow opening of the door. I wanted that to be true. Even then, some tired, loyal part of me wanted to believe there had been a softer explanation hiding underneath all the paperwork and measurements and whispered plans. But Thomas had printed Bradley's emails. Ruth had the recording. The contractor had come before breakfast with drawings for walls I had never agreed to remove. And my wedding photograph was still leaning in a hallway because my own daughter had decided my memories were clutter. Helping does not require hiding, I said. Emily's eyes filled, but I did not move toward her. That was new. My whole life as a mother had been movement toward her. A cry from the nursery, and I moved. A bad dream, and I moved. A broken heart, a missed rent payment, a car repair, a late-night call, and I moved. That morning, I stayed where I was. Thomas gave Bradley formal notice to stay off the property unless an appointment was arranged through his office. He gave Emily a separate envelope revoking every authority she thought she had over my finances, medical decisions, and home. Deputy Harris made a brief report. The contractor rolled his plans back into the truck without looking at anyone. Ruth stood by her mailbox with her chin lifted like she had personally guarded the whole state of Vermont. When the cars finally left, Emily remained at the bottom of the porch steps. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. The question landed between us with a strange kind of justice. I did not enjoy it. I need that understood. There was no victory in seeing my daughter small and cold in my driveway. There was only truth, and truth is not always warm. "You have a home in Burlington," I said. "You have a husband. You have choices. You are willing to leave me with none." She looked down then, and for a moment I saw the child she had been, standing against the pantry doorframe while Richard marked her height with a pencil. But children grow. Sometimes they grow into people who must meet the consequences of what they have chosen. I closed the door gently. Not hard. Not angry. Just closed. Over the next 3 weeks, Thomas helped me rebuild everything they had tried to rearrange. New will. New medical directive. New trust, written by my lawyer, explained to me line by line. Emily was removed as my agent. Bradley was barred from making any decision connected to my property. The house would not be sold after my death for someone else's profit. I placed it into a protected trust, with instructions that after my lifetime, the proceeds would support a Vermont nonprofit helping older women stay safely in their homes when family pressure became a threat instead of comfort. I rehung my wedding photograph in the primary bedroom myself. It took me 20 minutes because my hands are not as steady as they used to be, but I did it. I unpacked Richard's flannel shirt. I put my quilts back on the bed. I left Emily's height marks on the pantry door exactly where they were, not because she deserved them, but because my love for who she had been was still part of my life. Loving someone does not mean handing them the keys to your dignity. Months have passed since that morning. Emily has written twice. I have read both letters. I have not answered yet. Maybe one day I will. Maybe I will not. Forgiveness, I have learned, is not the same thing as reopening a door. They thought I had nowhere else to go. They forgot the one thing Richard spent his life making sure of. I already had a home. And that morning, when I changed the locks, I did not lose my family. I stopped letting them treat me like a guest in the life I built.